Late at night on August 8, 1969, Sharon Tate, film actress and pregnant wife of director Roman Polanski, was murdered along with her friends Wojciech Frykowski, Jay Sebring, and Abigail Folder, as well as Stephen Parent, the caretaker's visitor at 10050 Cielo Drive in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. The killers that night were Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, and Patricia Krenwinkel. Linda Kasabian was present but waited outside during the murders. The next night, intruders killed Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, two middle-aged entrepreneurs who lived not far away in Los Feliz, Los Angeles. That evening's murderers were Watson and Krenwinkel, plus Leslie Van Houten. Of course, I'm talking about the grisly slayings committed by a, quote, family, unquote, of misfits, mostly young women, followers of a charismatic hippie named Charles Manson. The slayings came to be called the Tate-LaBianca murders. But who was Manson? A hippie guru? A deluded musician convinced of his own talent? The leader of a band of fanatical followers? The mastermind behind as many as 35 murders? All of these may accurately describe Charles Manson, but how does a short, semi-literate, unkept man with bad teeth from Appalachia become a leader who attracts a bevy of female followers, successfully orders them to commit murders, and carves a swastika onto his forehead for all the world to see? What kind of childhood and what kind of early adulthood could produce such a person? Hi, I'm Tamworth Grice. Welcome to my channel, the Tamworth Grice Files. Here you will find cases that are spooky, macabre, fascinating, supernatural, and just plain weird. And in each case, I have a personal connection to the story. So be sure to stick around to the end to hear about that. Also, please subscribe because I need subscribers. Charles Manson was born in Cincinnati, Ohio on November 12, 1934. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was an impoverished 16-year-old from Kentucky. Kathleen's husband was William G. Manson, who knew he was not the father of the child. Manson's birth and early life are shrouded in mystery. According to Manson biographer Jeff Gwynne, Manson has lied about everything in his childhood, every opportunity that he's had, and no one's ever really challenged him on it, though the record was there if you wanted to look far enough. For example, Manson said his mother, Kathleen, was a prostitute, but nothing supports this. Manson also described his mother as an uncaring woman who once sold him for a pitcher of beer. But in fact, as Jeff Gwynne says, she loved him to the end of her life. Her heart ached for the things he did. Manson's biological father was probably Colonel Walker Scott, Colonel being his first name and not a military title. A 1951 reformatory case file on Manson reads, "Father unknown. He is alleged to have been a colored cook by the name of Scott." Throughout his life, Manson adamantly denied he was part African American, but his racism may have motivated this denial. Manson's mother was an impoverished alcoholic. After her husband divorced her, she and her brother robbed a man. They were sentenced to 5 years in prison. With his mother in prison, Manson lived first in Kentucky with his grandmother, a fiercely religious woman from whom he probably got his very extensive knowledge of the Bible. At age 5, he went to live with his mother's sister in West Virginia. According to biographer Gwynn, Charles was by now a, quote, disagreeable child, unquote, lazy, disobedient, and a compulsive liar who was, quote, obsessed with being the center of attention, unquote. At the age of 6, he attacked his 8-year-old cousin, Joanne, with a sharp sickle. Because he was slight of stature, he was bullied by his classmates on the first day of school and left school and came home. The next day, his uncle, disgusted by his cowardice, made him wear his cousin Joanne's dress to school. However, that story comes from Manson, and like many of the things he said about his childhood, it may not be true. His aunt and uncle's home in West Virginia included a piano, and young Manson showed a talent for music as he began to play by ear with one finger the songs he heard on the radio. His mother, Kathleen, was paroled after 3 years, and he said that the happiest day of his life was the day he was reunited with his mother. But her alcoholism and poverty worsened. By the time he was 13, Charles had turned to crime. He was transferred from one juvenile reformatory to another. Paroled at age 20, Manson married a waitress and held a series of odd jobs, one of which was at the Wheeling Downs racetrack. Here he learned to handle and care for horses, a skill that would later help him ingratiate himself with the owner of Spawn Ranch, which was operated as a riding stable. A car theft led to incarceration at Terminal Island, California. His wife, who'd had a son by Manson, divorced him in 1958. Her son with Manson committed suicide in 1993, well aware of who his father was and what he had done. Manson was in and out of prison over the next decade or so. When he qualified for early release in the mid-1960s, he asked to stay instead. He now thought of jail as home. But he was discharged from prison and granted permission to relocate to the San Francisco Bay Area. Manson frequently visited the Haight-Ashbury area, the epicenter of the growing hippie culture in the 1960s. Using his charm and a non-threatening manner, he became a leading Haight-Ashbury guru. Charles preached a religion picked up in prison that was part Scientology, part Dale Carnegie, part Eastern philosophy, part Christianity, and part Satanism. Soon he amassed a clique of female followers. Eventually, the group settled at Spawn Ranch, previously a Western movie location and now a riding stable on the edge of Los Angeles. The burgeoning family used drugs, listened to Charlie preach, sing, and play his guitar, and had indiscriminate sex, sometimes at orgies. Family member Catherine Scher later said being around Manson was, quote, hippie heaven. He's your brother and your father and your little boy. He's all men. It's a dream come true, at first, unquote. Meanwhile, Manson had a grandiose belief that he'd become a rock star as big as the Beatles. He had learned to play guitar in prison. When he met Dennis Wilson of the hit rock group The Beach Boys, the family moved into Wilson's house and took over. Wilson saw some talent in Manson and paid for studio time to record some of Manson's songs. He arranged for Manson to meet Terry Melcher, an important record producer and Hollywood royalty, as the son of film star Doris Day. Manson auditioned for Melcher at his rented house on Cielo Drive, but Melcher never signed Manson to a recording contract, earning Manson's hatred. Melcher moved out of the home, and the owner leased it to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. Meanwhile, Dennis Wilson realized he'd been naive. His relationship with Manson cost Wilson $100,000, an enormous amount of money in the 1960s, and like Melcher, he moved out of his rented home. Manson, infuriated as his record industry contacts abandoned him, gave Wilson's songwriting partner a .44 caliber bullet, saying, "Tell Dennis Wilson there are more where this came from." Manson also went to the Cielo Drive property to confront Melcher, but Melcher had already moved. Manson and his family continued their life at Spawn Ranch. Meanwhile, the nation was in turmoil. Cities erupted in riots. Many believed a race war between blacks and whites was imminent, and Charles Manson was one of these believers. The biggest music group of the era was the Beatles. When the Beatles' The White Album was released in November 1968, Manson believed he heard the Beatles cryptically predicting a race war in songs such as Helter Skelter. Manson now preached that Helter Skelter, referring to the coming racial apocalypse, as in other songs on the album, including Piggies, which he said encouraged the use of violence. He preached that Helter Skelter was on its way. He believed that the coming racial apocalypse would mean that he and his followers would form a new order and rule the world. Playing on everyone's fears of the racial turmoil, Manson described the coming race war in which blacks would murder nearly all whites. Fortunately for the family, he said, Charles Manson himself had been designated as the fifth angel, the other four being the Beatles. Being the fifth angel, he and he alone had been entrusted with a plan for white survival. Black leadership would fail after the coming revolution, he said, and the Manson family would rule the world. To hurry the race war along, Manson intended to murder white celebrities and blame their deaths on blacks. Hence the Tate LaBianca murders, where the killers wrote words in blood to frame African Americans for the slayings, words such as pig and death to pigs. Approximately 4 months after the Tate LaBianca murders, Susan Atkins, who'd been arrested for another crime, bragged to her dorm mates in jail about her role in the murders. So police sought out Charles Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian for their roles in the murders. Manson, Atkins, and Van Houten were already in jail facing other charges. A grand jury indicted Manson, Watson, Krenwinkel, Atkins, Van Houten, and Kasabian for the murders. Charles Watson was arrested in Texas. Patricia Krenwinkel was taken into custody and arrested in Alabama. Family member Linda Kasabian, who had not directly killed anyone, became the prosecution's star witness. Following a trial in which, at times, a circus atmosphere prevailed, a guilty verdict was delivered against Manson and his co-defendants. They were all sentenced to the death penalty. But in 1972, the California Supreme Court abolished the death penalty. The punishments were changed to life sentences. Now, here's my connection. I'm from Kentucky, where Charles Manson's mother was from, and so I'm very familiar with the tri-state area of Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia, where Manson grew up. My great-grandmother, who was very religious, personally knew Manson's also religious grandmother, although my great-grandmother never met Manson himself. My grandmother said my great-grandmother had been at more than one Appalachian religious revival where Manson's grandmother was present. I've been to the Cincinnati hospital where Manson was born several times due to the illnesses of relatives. In fact, my cousin died there. My grandfather worked in West Virginia in the next town over from where Manson had lived with his aunt and uncle. My grandfather had met Manson's uncle a few times, but again, he never met Manson. Finally, I'd been to Wheeling Downs, where Manson learned about horses with my family, although it's now Wheeling Island Hotel Casino Racetrack and has replaced horse racing with greyhound racing. So, what do you think? Do you think the Manson family members were quote, mindless robots, unquote, brainwashed and not responsible for their actions, as claimed by defense attorney Paul Fitzgerald? Do you think Manson was a peace-loving hippie whose intentions were misinterpreted by his followers who committed the murders, as claimed by another defense attorney, Irving Kanarek? Do you think Manson, who never personally killed anyone, should have been held responsible and jailed for the Tate LaBianca murders? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you found this video compelling, please subscribe because I really need subscribers. This is Tamworth Grice signing off. Until next time, as always, stay wonderful, stay weird, and have beautiful dreams.